I was almost going to say, like, what we try to do on a daily basis to help fix this, because early on in our marriage, this was probably, I mean, they were all issues, right? But probably next to the lack of communication, this was probably one of the top, because I had expectations of James and James had expectations of me. And then as we brought in the business, it just got heavier because we still weren't making those expectations clear to each other. But I would say, yeah, lack of communication and the setting of expectations go hand in hand. You have to be able to communicate the expectations so that there isn't a lack of expectations.
Welcome to Married Making Millions, and today we're doing a in-car episode as we drive.
On the road again.
We are on the road again, absolutely. And we've got the little one with us, so if there's any crazy noise in the background, we're just making it work. But today we wanted to talk a little bit about the top 10 reasons why married entrepreneurs, executive level C-suite achievers get divorced. And we were just having a conversation about this the other day with an entrepreneur that got divorced, and he was literally explaining a lot of the reasons that we're going to talk about today.
Yep. On
what happened. So
yeah, I just think it goes to show again the importance of this and talking about it, and the need for, people that are trying to make it work and trying to encourage each other and just building that community around this. He just said, I can relate to what you guys are saying because I'm an entrepreneur and I've been divorced now for a year, and shared with us a little bit of some of the story and the tensions, and it just kind of spurred us on to why don't we talk about those? Let's talk about those main reasons why people are getting divorced in entrepreneurship, and things that we've experienced ourselves, and things that were challenges even for us early on in our entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. So what is the first? We've got the list, and as I'm driving, I should be focused on the road.
I'll be reading.
Okay, so what's the first one on the list that you've got?
So, no surprise at all, is the fact that the first one is a work-life imbalance. Which is, this is our main, one of our main focuses, right? It's how in the world do you have a balance with work and in the home?
Right.
So one of the main issues is this imbalance.
And that's actually what this individual literally said was, I don't just have a 9 to 5 I can't turn off.
Correct.
But I would say there's multiple levels to entrepreneurship. There's multiple levels to entrepreneurship. There's multiple levels to being a business owner. There's multiple levels to being an executive. And I'm reading this book right now. We've talked about it before, but it's called Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. And you can have balance. You can turn off at 5 p.m., at 4 p.m. I'm up super early, but I've talked to my assistant, and we turn off at 4 p.m. Now there's maybe some calls here and there that I'll break that 4 p.m. rule, but for most of the part, 4 p.m.'s that's the shut-off time, because a lot of times if you're working all day, 6, 7, 8 hours, you don't have capacity and mental focus and clarity after 8, 9, 10 hours. There's been studies done on that. Right. So there has to be barriers set up, but we're 4 years in and I'm just learning this now.
Correct.
So,
and we're going to do a whole nother episode on practical solutions for this. So today we just really want to talk about
what they are,
the issues, and where we've seen that personally, and we know because we've experienced all of these things. So we see that it can be difficult. All right, number 2 is financial stress. And the financial stress specifically that comes with starting a business or starting a new venture or getting that high-level position, because there is financial stress. And we definitely saw this when we were first starting out with Crumble and with Primerica, different seasons of our lives, different starts with businesses.
Yep.
So, what would you say? Where would you say that started for us, financial stress?
Yeah, it started in the beginning. You have to sacrifice a lot. And so We were making zero money. I was making zero money. I was 100% commission when I was a financial advisor. And most people would be like, you're crazy. I can't believe you would do that. You didn't have this. You didn't do that. Blah, blah, blah. You didn't have stability for your family. Yeah, well, it was a risk because we knew the payoff could be really big down the road. And it was. And it still is. And you were a Christian school teacher making $28,000 a year. And what's that, like $15 an hour? Right. Probably less than that because you were working probably 50, 60 hours a week. Right? You were working 40 hours a week at school and then probably another 10 at home. More. Right. So, and kids these days at basic entry-level jobs are making $18, $19, $20 an hour. So you had a bachelor's degree. And anyway, we digress. But you were carrying the family as we were trying to develop and grow. And if you listen to our podcast on just our story, you'd hear the story of kind of how that progressed. But anyway, it creates stress because if you have debt and you have payments and you have all those things like we did early on, praise the Lord, we got out of debt. We were debt free at that time. We were just renting. We could live off of $30,000 a year. We could live really lean, and we wouldn't go out to eat. So there was that sacrifice. And yeah, we would have friends that would go on vacations, and it would be like, man, that would be really nice to go on a vacation or an all-inclusive, and we couldn't do that. We had to sacrifice that. So the other aspect is, you can sell, like for me, I'm a dreamer and a visionary, and I can sell the vision to you all day long. Yeah. But until a paycheck clears the bank account, it's not real. Now that dream and vision will last for so long, right? Like you'll hold on to it for a while. But after 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, a year, it's like, okay, James, like you sold me this vision of like we're gonna be financially free, we're gonna make it, but I'm not seeing that. And I think that's where a lot of people lose their hopes, dreams, vision, tenacity, discipline, habits, because it doesn't happen right away. It doesn't happen in 6 months. And that was the same thing when we got into Crumble. Yeah. I basically stopped financial advising, and we were doing pretty well. I think I was in the 70 or 80,000 mark around then. Yeah. And so that was awesome. Yeah. And then that income got cut in half because I wasn't meeting with people on a regular basis, so on and so forth. Right. So the point there is we were doing well, and then we cut that income in half, and now it's like, oh crap, if Crumble doesn't work out, we're in big financial trouble. Right.
And I wasn't working at that point either because you were doing well with Crumble, and we kind of had made some moves and changes. And so I would say for the first portion of like you getting into Primerica, we were like around 30,000. Mm-hmm. And then when we started Crumble, we were around 30,000. Yeah. And I would say one of the misconceptions about starting a business that I didn't know or that I was learning is that you make money like right away.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm gonna be a millionaire. Yeah, right.
I mean, it depends on how you set up your business, but us personally, we didn't take money or make money from the business until year 3.
3 years, people. 3 flipping years of making no money.
I would say, and I mean, maybe I should say this for our next episode, but prepare yourselves for that. Like, that is financially stressful. Yeah. So, again, we'll get into some solutions, but definitely financial stress can play a huge impact and role on your marriage as that starts to, the way that he handles bills or how I handle bills or how I see our money should be spent. He sees how our money should be spent. Those things are going to definitely put stressors on the marriage as well as in the business.
It depends what you want out of your business. If you're starting a franchise like we did, and you want to scale it, or let's say you just want to open one location, well, yeah, then you can take profits and income much sooner.
Sure.
Well, we were scaling. We wanted to open 7, 8, 9 locations rather quickly, and we didn't want to take out a lot of debt, and you can't get a lot of loans with a startup business like that from a traditional bank. And so what we did was any income or profit we made just went right back into the business as an investment. Right. And so, yeah, I didn't know about all that. Like, I'm thinking, hey, we're going to get a paycheck as soon as we start opening, but we didn't. Now, of course, the company paid me a small salary so we could pay the mortgage and live and food and things like that. Right. But I wasn't bringing in 6 figures, 7 figures. Like, that's not even a thing.
Right. We were working for the business as if we were
employees
of the business.
Correct.
Right. Which was very minimal. I mean,
as the business owner, you're going to do whatever it takes to win, and so you're going to pay your people first. Right. You're going to pay your last. And I will say it was hard because the business was bringing in some crazy money.
Right.
And all
We weren't
I was
touching it.
seeing was it going back into another store. And I'm like, man, it sure would be nice to take a $10,000 check so we could do some things with it, you know? But that didn't happen for a really, really long time. But I'm grateful. Now that we look back, I'm telling you, if you can hold off on taking profit, you will be that much more successful financially in your business.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I think that's a big one. But there's a huge misconception there of like, oh, you're a business owner, you must make millions, you're crazy, yeah. Like, no, everyone gets paid first. Employees get paid first, government gets paid first, vendors get paid, and then you get paid last. Right. So it's not all rainbows and hula hoops. Yeah, if you get paid.
Right. All right, let's move on to number 3. Number 3 is lack of communication. Which I just think this is marriages in general. I don't necessarily even think that this is specifically entrepreneurs. Although I will say I think entrepreneurs have a more difficult time just because of, back to number 1, the work-life imbalance or the time that it takes to communicate. So yes, communication, lack of communication in the marriage due to entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I thought you were going to find out somebody to cover that shift. Or I thought you were going to put in that person's vacation time. Or I thought you were going to pay the tax bill. Or no, wait, I thought you were going to, and I thought you were going to, and I mean, how many times did that happen, right? That happened a lot.
And then it's just a friction, a work-based friction because you're both trying to run the stores and you're both trying to manage things, and even that like goes then into home life, right? Like, oh, well, I thought you were going to pay this house bill. Or I thought you were going to pick that up from the store. I thought you were going to take the kids here. I thought we were going to go on a date this night. But then work stuff creeps in. So I would say communication. I mean, and we talk about this in several of our episodes because communication is such a huge part of
it's important. It's
work
everything.
And business.
Yeah.
But lack of communication is...
Well,
it's hard.
Here's a prime example, and we were just talking about this the other day. We were taking a vacation. I think we were going to Florida. Were we going to Florida? We were going somewhere. And we're going somewhere. And I wanted to crush some work. I wanted to get some work done.
I think we were actually going out of the country.
Was it Dominican or something?
I think so.
Or Jamaica?
I mean, it doesn't. It's
so
irrelevant.
we were going somewhere, and James wanted to tie up everything with a ribbon and a bow the morning we were leaving, and we didn't communicate.
The morning we were leaving.
And Angela was trying to pack and get the 1-year-old ready to go.
Last minute stuff.
And get all the last minute stuff and not be late. And James is trying to type away on the computer to get things done. And by the time I quote unquote finished everything, you had already basically written me off, shut down. I will say that was a fail on my part because I didn't help. I didn't communicate that I needed to get some things done, or maybe I should have stayed up later the night before. And I'm like, why is she shutting down? Why is she not talking to me? And we're in the truck, we're headed to the airport, and I basically just said, like, I'll turn this car around if you don't tell me what's going on. And it was, let's just say, it got a little heated.
Yeah.
But we communicated, and I think there was some tears shed, maybe on both sides.
Probably.
And we fixed it, but I just remember that being a really big communication fail, mainly on my part.
Well, and I could have probably communicated in that moment, in the heat of the moment, and said, James, I need help with this. Like, work can wait until we're sitting at the airport waiting for the airplane. But right now, I need to finish.
Right.
We need to get out the door.
Right. So I think that's one aspect. The other aspect I would say, too, is we're talking about the point of view where you and I were working in the business together. There's a lot of times where entrepreneurs and couples, right, married couples, aren't both working in the same business. And so what does that look like for a spouse?
Yeah.
What does that look like for a spouse
when
I'm the business owner or whatever, the high achiever, and you're not in the business?
Right. I think it's really hard, and this is one of the things, again, that the person that we were talking with was mentioning was the spouse didn't really want to understand the things that he was going through or the things that he was doing. She only grew up in a 9-to-5, and so she didn't understand the 24/7 time frame.
Which, again, we don't agree with 100%.
No.
There's times where you need to be, but...
So here's how I explained it to him. I said, the beauty of owning your own business is that you're on 24/7, but you can take any time off that you want. Like, I could get on a plane today and go wherever I needed to. However, I'm still working. I'm still checking my emails. I'm still checking in with people. So, like, that doesn't shut off, but there's freedom in the fact that I don't call a boss. I can leave when I want to. I can manage my own schedule. So, but sometimes that's hard for the spouse that hasn't been doing it to understand that.
Yeah, there's so much freedom. There's no structure per se, but there should be if you want your life, and that's what we're talking about in marriage. Is you've got to have that structure.
Right.
Otherwise, it'll be just chaos.
Right. So, anyways, I would say with communication, you have to be willing to understand your spouse. Like, I knew James needed to work in those moments, but the frustration came from when he chose to do those things.
Right. Not the best
but
timing.
I should have communicated that with him. So, definitely lack of communication being a huge one that we'll probably do several episodes on, because we just really believe that communication is really important.
Yep.
All right, number 4, differing priorities or goals. And again, I guess I kind of jumped ahead on this because this is what I was talking about. Sometimes I don't know that the other spouse wants to get on board with the other person. So in that sense, and we talked about this a little bit, you have to sacrifice for each other. Who should give up for who, right? What does that look like? If I'm the entrepreneur wanting to do something, are you supposed to compromise and give up so that I can do what I want to do? Or do you need to give up your goals and dreams because I don't really see that that's for us?
That's a tough question. But I think it goes back to, are we on the same page about where we want to go?
Right, and that's what it's saying.
Yeah, and if you're not on the same page, then you better get on the same page, or it'll end in divorce, or it'll end in conflict and friction and disaster and stress and pain and all those things.
Yeah.
And so the same page is like sitting down. Like, what are our goals for the next 12 months? What are our goals for family life? How many kids do we want?
Right.
Do we want to have multiple houses? Do we want a vacation? Do we want to give back to certain charities and donations? Like, it's talking about all of those types of things and then coming together on it to see where you align. And if you don't align, then why? But you and I didn't align in the early years.
Yeah, that's true.
I was just off in the clouds, knowing someday, somehow, that these things I'm dreaming about will be accomplished. I don't know how I would get there yet, and that's my personality. That's not necessarily your personality. Right. You need to see specific tasks to get to each goal.
Yeah.
I'm not like that. Yeah. I just need to see the goal, and I'll figure out a way to get there.
Right.
And so if your spouse is like that, number one, you can't force them to get there.
Yeah.
You just can't force it, because if you force it, it's not going to be organic and natural, and they're not going to want to do it.
Right.
It's just like sales. Yeah, it's just like sales. You can't really sell people stuff, especially that they don't want, until that person comes to the conclusion on their own
that they need it.
Then they will take it. Right? And so I think that's really the same thing about selling the dream or the vision to your spouse, to your wife, or what have you, is they have to be ready for it. Yeah. And you were ready for it. I mean, we talked in we talked in the podcast about our story, so go check that episode out about our growth levels. And I just self-developed a little bit more than you, and then eventually you're like, wow, this is wild, he's growing, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to catch up. And so then we moved together. Right. So I think that's how you create alignment. But to be honest, if you're not there yet and you're listening and you're like, man, I really want my spouse to be on board, it starts with communication.
Right. It goes back to the last problem.
Just be honest about it and say, honey, like, I just feel like we're on different pages. How do we get here? Right. Is this even something you want? Right.
And we'll go through. I don't want to tell you guys what we did and what seemed to work, because I want to do that on a whole different episode. But we definitely saw differing priorities and what I wanted versus what he wanted, and there definitely was a compromise. There had to be a compromise, and eventually we needed to be on the same page if we were going to move forward. Okay, number 5, we got to keep moving here. role confusion. Yeah, we
Yikes.
saw this very clearly.
I'm the boss, and you do what I tell you.
Right. So
That's not true. That didn't
we
happen.
worked in Crumble both as like managers in the beginning, and I would say that's where role confusion started. Just not knowing, like, and so many of these are wrapped into each other, right? But I didn't know the way he was running the store was different than how I ran the store.
Right.
We were both technically managers, but the role confusion, as in, like, he was my boss, but he wasn't my boss because we were running things together.
Right, we're
and
owners.
he was still my husband, number one. And I was still a wife. I wasn't his assistant or his manager.
I needed one of those back then, though.
So definitely lots of role confusion in the early years of Crumble. And also then that trickled into our home where I was often still the store manager. I wasn't his wife.
Right.
So that definitely played a huge role in a lot of the conflicts that we had early on.
Right. I mean, it was just over communication about work. We were just talking about work
Right.
all the time.
That's what I mean.
From the
That
day
came into
from
the
minute
house.
we woke up to the
If
day
we
went
saw
to bed.
each other.
Right. Now, not everybody, excuse me, not everybody is going to be working
that.
together in the same
Correct.
business, right? So, role confusion in that aspect could be like, hey, don't, husband or wife, whoever the entrepreneur or the executive is, don't bring your work home. When you come home, you need to switch roles, and you're a husband and you're a dad.
Right.
And you're going to be the best dad and the best husband.
Right.
You know, and there's a lot of people that miss that, and I've missed that a lot in the past. I try to make that more of a priority. When I'm done with work at 4 or 5 o'clock, or when I come home from a trip, I'm dad and I'm husband, right? And it's the same thing with you. Like, you're mom all day,
Right.
and when I come home, you need to slow down on being mom all day because you've just done mom for 12, 15 hours.
Right.
And so dad needs to pick that up and be dad and help discipline and help coach and train and teach.
Right.
But also, I think the other role that needs to happen is like the dating role. Like, do you want your marriage to thrive? And we aren't always really good at this. We try our best, but we need to date each other. We need to, where's the romantic role? We need to get into that role. And so there's a lot of different roles. But I think the main question is like, how do you do that? And we'll talk about that obviously when we dive into some of those solutions. But that is a huge problem, is where does your role turn off? Where does it pick up?
Right. Especially when you're both involved in the business, I think.
That's a tough
That
one.
can be really tricky. Yeah. Okay. Number 6, jealousy and resentment. And I think this plays out in a lot of different ways. I think a lot of entrepreneurs or entrepreneur spouses see it in the time, or goes back to the first one, work-life imbalance. You're jealous of the time or the energy or the effort that your spouse is putting into said business.
Yeah. Or
and so
job
that's
or whatever.
where the resentment starts to build up, as like, and that was one of the conversations that James and I had was, we joke about it. It's not funny, but like, Crumble is your mistress. You spend all your time, your energy, your effort on Crumble, and I feel like the leftovers. And that was painful. It was painful to have that conversation, but that's truly how I felt. But there was that level of jealousy and resentment for sure. So it
So high
happens.
achiever and business owner, don't be making your business your affair against your wife,
Yeah.
because that totally can happen. And you've got to identify it and realize it.
Yeah.
And, you know, I would almost say, you know, cheating, if you will, or an affair is not just with another individual. Like, it could be with anything that you really give your time to.
Yeah.
More than where it should be.
Right.
So, you know, that's definitely a my bad on my part of prioritizing, you know, the business. And we've learned so much, and we've now got systems and things in place that do allow us to step back and not to, I don't know, for lack of a better word, lust over the business or like make it my thing. It is my thing, and it's great, and it's a baby.
Right.
And it'd be tough to let it go, 100%. But we're putting things in place to allow that to happen. So I think, again, identifying that jealousy is key.
Right, that was wrong on my side, to be jealous or create that resentment, because then it just created friction in our marriage.
But I think it's healthy to communicate about it. Like, hey, dude, you're spending 80% of your time.
3.
You're spending 80% of your time with the business. How would you feel if I spent 80% of my time with another man?
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of aggressive, but that's ultimately kind of what was happening, right? And we're talking in facetious here, but that's the truth. Like, how would you feel?
Right.
You wouldn't feel good. I wouldn't feel good. You know, if you were spending 80% of your time with another man, like, I'd be super jealous.
Right.
So I think that's absolutely a factor. The other thing I think, jealousy-wise, too, is like your team.
Yeah.
Are you spending too much time with your team?
Yeah.
Is your team always coming over to your house? Are you always partying with your team? Are you always doing things
going out with your coworkers?
Yeah, doing with your team.
Yeah.
Even bringing your spouse. Like, even if I brought you and we were doing all these team member events and things, like, I'm always
with them.
Yeah, but honey, it's just an event. It's just a celebration, and you're coming with me, so I'm spending time with you, right?
Right.
No, it doesn't count. And so I think that's something to be careful of too. Like, you can't just pretend that, you know, just because you're bringing your spouse with you to a work event or a party or what have you, that counts as time. That doesn't count as time with your spouse. Trust me, I've learned that the hard way many times. Take my advice. Not that it's always very good, but, you know, on this one, it's probably right. So, yeah, jealousy, that's a big one.
The other area that I saw jealousy come out was when I started backing away from the business a little bit. Like, I started becoming a mom. I was jealous of the fact that he had an outlet outside of the home.
Right, because you were just with a little tiny infant that didn't speak anything.
Like, that's exhausting too. And so I remember that jealousy and that resentment coming up, even though I was doing what I wanted to do. Like, it was my choice. I wanted to be home, but secretly inside, I was a little bit sad that I didn't have that community anymore. I didn't have that work outlet, and I wasn't working with him. So I definitely saw it in that way too.
Yeah, as you transition out of kind of the day-to-day and new roles, right, exactly. So something to think about.
All right, number 7, unrealistic expectations. These are all so good because it just hits home. How many unrealistic expectations did we have?
1,000.
On each other, on the business, on our coworkers, on our, I don't know, on our kids.
Yeah.
Just like the pressure of entrepreneurship and the way that things should be creates such a friction every single day in our homes and on our marriage.
Yeah, and if you don't talk, it's the same thing with a job, right? For example, a lot of people who are business owners and managing people will probably understand this. If you don't have a good job description and you don't have a good, clear expectation for what this new team member, employee, what have you, needs to do, then they'll do something wrong or they'll mess something up, and you'll either get frustrated or get mad at them, and they'll say, well, I didn't know I needed to do that. And that's your fault as the leader, manager, owner for not setting the expectation clearly. And so it's no different with your spouse. If you don't set the expectation that, like, honey, when we start this business up, it's going to be really freaking hard and we're going to have 90-hour weeks. But as we build and scale, it will change and it will grow. Now, that's not specific enough. The expectation is, your spouse could be like, in 3 weeks, we're going to not be working 90 hours a week and it'll be great. And then we'll be rolling in the dough, literally. But that's not the expectation, or that's not reality. And so setting clear expectations for the business, for your spouse, for your partner, for whatever, is going to fix that problem. And I kind of gave them the solution, if you will. But we're going to talk about that more. But the point is it's even more than that. Like, the expectation of, hey, we're going to go to dinner tonight, but dude, you didn't show up from work until 7:30, and now I'm kind of exhausted and don't really want to go out with you because you worked until XYZ because you didn't tell me what time we were going to be out. Like, how many times did that happen?
A lot.
So, it goes back to one that we already talked about, which is communication.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you communicate the expectations, then there it is.
Right. And we won't give away. I was almost going to say, like, what we try to do on a daily basis to help fix this, because early on in our marriage, this was probably, I mean, there were all issues, right? But probably next to the lack of communication, this was probably one of the top.
Yeah, it was
because
big.
I had expectations of James, and James had expectations of me. And then as we brought in the business, it just got heavier because we still weren't making those expectations clear to each other. But I would say, yeah, lack of communication and the setting of expectations go hand in hand. You have to be able to communicate the expectations so that there isn't a lack of expectations.
Right. I think there needs to, and lastly we can move on, but I think there needs to be some, as the business person, especially if you're in the startup phase, there does need to be some grace there from the spouse.
Absolutely.
Or whoever's maybe not in the business 100%. There has to be some flexibility.
Yeah.
Now, spouse who's in the business or the executive, like, don't take advantage of that.
Correct.
Because then you'll lose that goodwill and it'll be crying wolf. Like, oh, we had an emergency come up at work, so I couldn't make it home. Well, yeah, but you have an emergency every day. So that's a problem.
Right.
So I think there does need to be a little bit of grace there, because this is kind of the Wild West until you get it built and you get staff and systems and processes and so on in place. So there should be some grace, but you can't be taking that grace to a whole new level of, like, you know, boy crying wolf.
Right. I would agree. Number 8, I feel like we was kind of in one of the other ones. Number 8 is different visions for the future, and I would say that that goes into having different. What was the other one? Different priorities or goals. I would say different priorities, goals, visions.
Similar.
All of that, has to be it definitely has to be aligned, and making sure that. And I think we talked about this in the first or second episode, but once we were on the same page, how the trajectory of our business changed.
It skyrocketed.
Right.
Yeah, it skyrocketed.
If you're working against each other, good luck trying to go anywhere, because it just doesn't work like that.
I mean, we talked about it. We did talk about it in one of the episodes. Is when your spouse is on board with your vision, your goal or dream, I mean, you guys can get to Mount Everest.
Yep.
If your spouse is not on your goal or dream, then you won't get out of Death Valley.
Right.
And you'll stay there. And you'll try.
Right. And this was the specific problem with the person that we were talking with. He said his spouse, his wife, just couldn't see it. She couldn't get on board with it. They tried a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, she could not support him in running that. And that's heartbreaking. I mean, I feel like if you love your spouse and you're with the right person, then you just want to see them succeed.
Flourish.
And you want to go with them, right? Like, I remember thinking, this is crazy, but I trusted him as a person and I wanted to go with him. So I think, yes, differing visions for the future is definitely a friction and a pain point. If you have different goals and dreams, you're just kind of doing this number, going towards your own goals and dreams versus working together.
Right. And I apologize if you're watching this episode. It's probably a little bumpy because New Jersey doesn't know how to pave their roads properly. So we could do another episode on government funding and spending, maybe.
Probably not.
Yeah, probably not. Keep politics aside.
Okay. Number 9, emotional exhaustion.
I'm already exhausted.
But it's true, right? I think I like that it uses emotional exhaustion, because there's a lot of exhaustion. There's
mentally
physical,
exhausted,
mental, spiritual. Like, you are just wiped, especially when you're starting up a business. I remember we were sick all the time because we were just our bodies were so exhausted. So exhausted. So that is a real thing. But I think the emotional piece is what then plays into your home. Like, when you are completely exhausted and you have nothing left, I think you just kind of start to pick at each other. Like, that's where you pick at each other's flaws and you don't want to communicate, and we get lazy and we don't want to put in the extra energy or effort. So I would say we saw that for the first probably a year of starting up Crumble.
Yeah, it was exhausting, just all around, physically, mentally. I lost a ton of weight. Wasn't healthy, sick, like you were saying. But then we also didn't put in the effort really with each other. Like we didn't.
No, because we were exhausted.
Yeah, we didn't put a lot of effort in. I can remember we started the business in October. We started before that, but we opened it in October. And I can remember just turning on the fireplace in the basement and just falling asleep for hours. And we both did that, and we weren't engaging each other, we weren't communicating. And, you know, the marriage was on the downhill. It was on the downhill.
Right.
And until, you know, that conversation, which we talked about in the podcast, our story.
Right.
Until we had that conversation, it was like a swift kick to the you-know-whats and saying, yo, dude, you're the leader of this family. You need to step it up. You need to put out extra energy. You need to figure out how to climb out of this hole. Mm-hmm. And thankfully, we found some mentors and some people that helped, and we started slowly making it work. But it's exhausting. It is exhausting. And that's where the support of your spouse comes in.
Yeah.
Like if you're not in the business, let's talk about, again, spouse, partner, not being in the business or not being an executive. Like spouse, you need, and if I'm the spouse, right, I need, right? But you need to really step up your game in the 10th hour, in the 11th hour. For your other spouse, you got to lift them up.
Yeah.
You got to help them. You got to coach them. You got to provide that mental rejuvenation, if you will.
Right.
And it's going to be tough. It's going to be hard. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be annoying. It's going to be painful. You know, you're on the 12th hour with your 2-year-old or 3-year-old, but you got to say, okay, this really is kind of sucky, but I know my spouse needs some support and they need help. Right. So I'm going to hammer through another 3 hours. We're going to get them to bed, and we're going to have a nice dinner, and we're just going to relax, and I'm going to help lift him up or lift her up or what have you. That's a really important part. I can remember many times where you did that. I just came home from a really crappy day, kind of when we had transitioned, and you know, we had a good dinner, we enjoyed some time together, we got to relax and rejuvenate. And that small thing to that entrepreneur, that small a bit of time or that small support, again, it fills you up, it rejuvenates you, it energizes you, it really gets you to the next level. So I think that's it. And then, you know, the other factor too is spiritually. Like, you know, we're obviously people of faith, born again Christians, and that is another level. If I'm not in the Word, if I'm not praying, if I'm not seeking wise counsel, spiritual counsel, that's another thing that really rejuvenates you and lifts you up. And I can remember early on when we were in Crumble that my spiritual life really kind of declined because I thought I didn't have time. I wasn't making it a priority.
Yep. Yeah. Exhaustion, but especially emotional exhaustion, especially when you're both in the business. I think it definitely leads to friction because you're both exhausted and there's nothing left in either of you. So it's the first thing to go, if you will, is time and energy towards each other.
100%.
I think that's really hard. Okay, the last one, number 10.
Number 10.
Infidelity.
Hey!
And we've already touched on this a little bit, but for us, infidelity wasn't necessarily with other people, but with the business. What are you spending your time, the majority of your time,
doing,
creating emotional relationships, creating that bond? You're spending so much time with the people that you're around, and it was, it goes back to jealousy and resentment too, right? I was jealous of the people he was pouring time and energy and effort into, and then coming home emotionally exhausted and having nothing left for me. Mm-hmm. And so for us, that's kind of what that looked like. Where with other people, maybe it is somebody that they're spending that 8, 9, 10 hours at work with. It very quickly, because you're spending so much time in that space, can become a place of infidelity. And
that can be super dangerous.
Yeah.
Super
you need
dangerous.
to be aware of it.
Because there's a book called The Like Switch, which is, I read kind of during my sales history, but basically it talks about frequency and proximity. And those are really the two things that allow you to become friends with people, is frequency and proximity. And so, you know, we talk about infidelity here. The 10th point on this topic is, as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, if you're constantly around the same people, and the same people are giving you proximity, and they're giving you frequency, and they're giving you your time, they start to become more attractive. They start to become more friendly. They start to fill you up, right, with the things that maybe your spouse isn't filling you up with.
Yes.
Because you're not there, because you're not at home. And so where are you getting that frequency, proximity? And where are you getting that ear? Where is that person listening to you? Well, my wife's not listening to me at home because she doesn't understand anything about the business.
Yes.
But this, Susie at work, man, she's really listening to me. She's being coachable to me. And that can head down a very, very, very slippery slope, and that can destroy your marriage. It doesn't mean you become, you have an affair, but the fact that you're spending time is very, very dangerous in that aspect. Thankfully, we haven't had that problem, and that's a huge blessing because that's something you need to be aware of. But that can absolutely be a friction point and be a problem when it becomes, being a business owner and entrepreneur. And so you can't fault your spouse for saying, why are you spending so much time at work? The business has been built. You have all these people. If you are being faithful to your wife and your spouse, you should be in work, getting work done, and getting gone.
Yeah.
So, that happens all the time. I mean, there's stories about that all the time.
Right. And we know why. Because
frequency and proximity.
You listed all of them, but you feel heard, you feel seen, you feel understood. This is somebody whose goals do align with you. This is somebody who you are communicating with. This is somebody who does have the same role as you. So it's like all the problems that we've listed are taken away because you're in proximity with a person who gets it all, who has all those things, right? So I think it is a dangerous place. It's something to be aware of. Obviously, we'll go through some practical things that can maybe help, but I think just being aware of the fact that it can happen and having your guard up towards some of those things is very important when it comes to entrepreneurship. Yeah,
you got to have your guard up. Let me tell you this little funny story. So I was in the Coast Guard, and this might not sound good, but I'm going to say it anyway.
Great.
So I was in the Coast Guard, and we were just married, and there's ratings, right? There's ratings for men and women. Let's be honest.
So bad.
Let's be honest.
Right.
Back in the day in high school, I'd be like, oh, that girl's a 7, or she's a 10, or she's an 8. And you guys did that for the men too.
Sure,
yeah, you did. So you'd give these ratings, right? Oh, he's a hottie, blah, 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 okay? Well, there's this rating that was going around in the Coast Guard.
On the ship.
I was on the ship, and so on the ship it's just 100 and something people, and that's it. You don't see anybody else for weeks at a time.
Months at a time.
And so on the ship, the guys would talk about, and this wasn't appropriate, it wasn't right, but I think it's kind of funny. When you're on the ship, there's only so many ladies that are on the ship. And so the guys would say, well, she's a Coast Guard 8. Or she's a Coast Guard 9, and it's a different scale than the normal world.
Then when you're off the ship.
When you're off the ship, the Coast Guard 9 might actually be like a 5.
Sad.
So
it's because you're in proximity. And
yes,
they understand what you're doing.
But in the same world, it's the same thing in the restaurant or in the business or in the office space, because you're so close that your wife could be a 10. I mean, my wife is a 10, probably an 11. Let's be honest. And I'm not just saying that because we're recording here. Definitely an 11.5.
Is that on the ship or off the ship?
No, that's in the real world here. Yeah, that's in the real world.
Thanks.
So she's totally an 11 and a half. But if I'm at my job 80, 90 hours a week, I don't get to see my 11 and a half. I get to see the restaurant 8s. And I'm like, wow, that's a restaurant 8. That's nice. And that can cause temptation and friction as well. And so infidelity is a huge thing. It's a real big problem, and that can totally cause divorce with entrepreneurs and executives. And you hear it all the time in the news with politicians and business people and this and that getting divorced and this and that. And it's because we're not putting the work and effort in. And we're not perfect by any stretch. You and I are not perfect.
And we've had all of these 10 problems. For sure.
100%.
Without a doubt, we've gone through all of them.
Yeah. And so are you communicating about it? Are you setting the expectations properly? And are you willing to work?
Yeah.
Are you willing to work on the marriage? Because it's a lot of freaking hard work.
Yep.
So infidelity is a real problem, and that's why it's on the list. And we've dealt with all of those things, but every single one of these things on this list, we've dealt with, we've gone through, we've overcome it. it's come back up. We've overcome it.
Right.
These are ongoing,
Right,
and marriage is a ton of work.
Right, things to constantly be aware of. It's not like you fix it and
then you never have it
the
again.
practical
Right.
solution and it never comes up again. I
Right.
think it's just constant things to be aware of.
100%.
So next episode, we would love to try to go through these again, but come up with like solutions that have worked for us and that have maybe worked for other couples.
Yep.
We would love to hear your solutions to some of these, or things that you're going through now where you're like, hey, I'm trying to make this work, but here's the problem that we keep running into. By no means are we experts, or do we have all the answers. We go to God's Word daily to try to figure out a lot of this.
Yep.
But we'll cover a lot of the things that have worked for us in the past. So thank you so much for listening today. We know that some of these problems are heavy and that they are real things that you're walking through. Try to be encouraged that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and this can work. There can be a work, life, marriage balance. We'll see you guys on the next podcast.